Her neighbor leaned on the fence, smirking. "Still driving that old wreck?" Linda Harris, 68, didn't bother answering. 3 weeks later, she owned the car dealership and the note on her neighbor's brand new SUV. She'd spent decades keeping to herself. Now she decided who stayed on the road, and when the tow truck rolled in, the title was already in her desk drawer. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I saw the smirk before I heard the words. The cul-de-sac did its usual Sunday hum, sprinklers ticking, a leaf blower whining 2 doors down, the air already warm enough to stick a shirt to your back. I eased my sedan into the driveway, left hand feathering the wheel like it was an old friend. The car isn't pretty, paint a shade duller than memory, the dash sun-faded where I used to clip invoices back when I still ran routes, but the engine settled into a neat idle, the kind that tells you it'll give what it's got. No more, no less. Victoria Hale drifted down the sidewalk in tennis whites and sunglasses, a takeaway cup cradled like a prop. She has a way of walking past people that feels like walking through them. Her perfume arrived a second before she did, something sugary that didn't quite mask the bite. "Still driving that old wreck?" she said, and she pitched it just right so it carried across the street, where Mr. and Mrs. Keller were playing with their grandkids, and even to the open garage where Mark was pretending to organize his fishing gear. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at my car. Then she smiled into her coffee lid as if it had told the joke. I took the keys out and let one drop onto my palm. They're heavy with history. "Morning," I said, because something in me refuses to let the world be less polite than it has to be. She stopped, shifting her weight, eyeing the front fender like she found a stain. "You know, the dealership's got a trade-in event this week. You'd get something." She lifted her cup. "Just thinking of your reputation, Howie. People notice." "People do," I said. I gave her the kind of smile I keep for weather talk and HOA meetings. Behind her, Linda stepped onto the porch with a dish towel over her shoulder, chin lifted in that quiet, unbothered way she's cultivated over 40 years of teasing out what matters and what doesn't. She caught my eye. It's a small thing, doesn't even look like a thing to anyone else, but she saw my jaw tighten. She always does. "Mark?" Victoria called without turning. Her husband glanced up from the tackle box and raised a hand. "Tell Howie about the new electric they showed you. The one with the, what do you call it, self-driving on the highway." Mark opened his mouth, thought better of it, and stared at his lures like they might save him. Victoria's smile widened, slow as a knife. "Never mind. I forgot. Some people like to live in the past." She moved on, steps crisp, ponytail a metronome. The Keller twins started chanting something about a wrecked car, and the sprinkler mist carried their voices around the cul-de-sac, making them softer and meaner at the same time. I stood there a beat longer, letting the heat soak into my shoulders, then popped the trunk and lifted out the bag of groceries like it might answer for what just happened. Linda met me halfway down the walk. "She's got a talent," she said, soft but not gentle. "For what?" I asked, finding the bruise and pressing. We set the bag on the porch rail. A lemon rolled out and bumped my wrist. "It's just a car," I said, and I meant it, mostly. I looked back at the street. Victoria paused at her mailbox, the thin gold chain at her throat catching the sun. 2 houses over, her SUV sat nose out in the driveway, a gleaming creature with its LED eyes half-lidded, leases and monthly payments tucked under its skin like veins. Linda followed my gaze. "It's not the car, Howie." She reached up and touched my jaw where the muscle had knotted. Her hands are warm, even in July. "It's that she wanted them to hear." I exhaled through my nose. "Well," I said, "let her have her audience." She lifted the grocery bag. "You want coffee or bourbon?" "It's 9 in the morning. So, coffee with a look at the bourbon." We were halfway through pancakes when there was a rap on the screen door, and Ed Parker stuck his head in like he always had since 1983. "You 2 degenerates got room for one more?" he said. He smelled faintly of boat motor and aftershave. He feeds seagulls off the dock before church and claims it puts him right with the Lord. Linda waved him toward the table. Cards tonight? She asked. Ed grinned. I brought the good deck, also gossip. But first, why does our street sound like a high school cafeteria? Because the Queen has decreed, Linda said, and jerked her chin toward Victoria's house. Ed followed her glance, eyebrows going up. He took a seat, flipped my mug around to read the slogan, Grant Logistics. Right place, right time, and set it back like it might be a relic. What did she say this time? Same song, I said. New volume. Ed chewed that over while Linda set him up with pancakes, then did a lazy look at me over the rim of his coffee. You going to let her park in your head, or do we charge her by the hour? I'm not renting real estate, I said. She wanted a crowd. She got one. I'm not giving her an encore. Ed stabbed a pat of butter. You're a better man than me. Don't tell him that, Linda said. His head will float off. It should have ended there. It often does, small slights dissolving into a day, into a week, into life. But there was a pebble-on-tin feeling under my ribs that didn't go away. After lunch, I went out to the garage to straighten the workbench that didn't need straightening. The smell of oil and cedar hung in the heat. I wiped a non-existent smudge from the sedan's hood and stepped back, looking at it the way a man looks at his handwriting, flaws and all, but his. Late afternoon, we cracked open a deck of cards on the dining room table. Ed deals like a casino croupier, makes it look easy and a little sinister. Linda set out a bowl of salted peanuts and her reading glasses, which she never uses for cards and always for effect. We played 3 hands before Ed couldn't help himself. So, he said, dropping a queen on my run, what would it take to shut her up? I laid down my draw. A miracle, I said. Or a purchase, he said, and when I looked up, the corner of his mouth had that fox curve it gets when a plan knocks on his skull. You remember Kurt Benson? Manages the luxury place over on Abercorn? Stopped by the marina yesterday, said his boss is getting itchy to sell. Now, I don't believe in fate, but I do believe in timing. Linda snorted. Ed. He held up both palms. I'm just saying, there's noise in the market. Interest rates mess with people's nerves. A smart buyer could, what's the phrase? Right place, right time. My heartbeat did a small, tidy double step. It was ridiculous. It was expensive. It was not how I spend retirement. I stacked my cards, set them on the table, and looked out the window. Across the street, Victoria's driveway gleamed. Her SUV sat there sedate and smug, chrome winking. Linda followed my look, then fixed her gaze on me. Don't, she warned, half laughing, half serious. Do not let him put gasoline on this. Ed leaned forward, elbows on the tablecloth, voice dropping like we were about to cheat the house. Howie, he said, you asked what it would take to shut her up. I'm telling you, I know exactly who to call. I didn't say yes, I didn't say no. The air felt a notch cooler all of a sudden, like a door had opened somewhere. Ed slid his phone across the table to me. On the screen, a name I hadn't heard in years. A lawyer we used when the business was growing. Someone who never raised her voice but always got things done. You want to keep playing, Ed said, or do you want to see how deep her smirk really goes? I reached for the phone. The phone was warm in my palm, like it had been waiting for me to pick it up all along. Ed leaned back, the kind of satisfied tilt that said he'd planted the seed and could now just watch it grow. Call her, he said. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I set the phone down on the table and turned it so the screen went black. What's this place worth? Ed's eyes lit up. Now you're talking. He rattled off the number like it was the weather. Matter of fact, but with enough weight to make the air feel heavier. It wasn't pocket change, even for a man who'd sold his company clean and walked away. I kept my face still, but my brain was already calculating. Liquid assets, investment accounts, the old warehouse I never got around to selling. That's just the sticker, Ed added. The real play is the leases. Steady cash flow, repeat customers, and Kurt's been keeping the place sharp. You wouldn't be buying a fixer-upper. I swirled the last sip of coffee in my mug, and if the seller wants it quiet, he does, which is why you need Dana. The name hit like a dropped coin. Dana Ruiz, sharp as a tack, more patient than she let on, and allergic to small talk unless it served her. She'd negotiated half the contracts that got my logistics business off the ground back in the 80s. If she was still practicing, she could get a deed to change hands without the neighborhood knowing until the paint dried. Ed was already scrolling. She still owes me a favor from when I hooked her brother up with that fishing cabin in Tybee. She'll take your call. The line rang only twice before Dana's voice came through, low and precise. Parker, to what do I owe this interruption? Ed grinned like a kid. Got a buyer for a dealership. Discreet buyer, discreet deal. You interested? A pause. Who's the buyer? Ed slid the phone across to me. Ask him yourself. I took it, picturing her in some downtown office with the blinds half closed and a stack of case files leaning like a Jenga tower. Dana, I said, it's Howie Grant. The pause this time was shorter, warmer. Well, I read you sold the company. Thought you were done with paperwork. I was. Now I might not be. We kept it surface level. She didn't need the whole Victoria story, not yet. Just the basics, the dealership, the seller, the desire for a smooth, quiet transfer. Dana's answers were like steel beams, straight, strong, without a lot of decoration. It's clean, she said finally. Owner's got no liens, taxes are up to date, assets match the books. If you want it, we can have you in the office by Thursday. Make it sooner, I said. When I hung up, Linda was leaning in the doorway, arms crossed. She'd heard enough to piece together the gist. Tell me you're not thinking about what I think you're thinking. I let the corner of my mouth twitch upward. Depends. What do you think I'm thinking? That you're going to sink a small fortune just to make a point. I pushed my chair back. Not a point. An investment. Her brow went up. Uh-huh. And the return? I let the grin land fully this time. Dead serious. Ed chuckled, tapping the table. That's my boy. Linda sighed, but it wasn't the deep, defeated kind. More like she was already picturing herself in the passenger seat of something shiny and new, even if she wouldn't admit it. If you're doing this, she said, you're doing it right, no half measures. I want to meet this seller. You will, I said. Dana's setting it up. The three of us sat there for a moment, the quiet stretching out. Somewhere outside, a sprinkler ticked to life, water hissing against concrete. Linda's gaze drifted toward the street, where Victoria's SUV gleamed under the last slant of afternoon sun. She didn't smile, but her voice had that faint thread of satisfaction in it. She won't see this coming. I reached for my phone again, scrolling to Dana's number. That, I said, is the idea. The line started to ring. The morning air still held a trace of night when I pulled the sedan out of the driveway. The streets were quiet except for the occasional dog walker or jogger, the kind of Savannah morning where the light feels soft enough to touch. Linda stood on the porch in her robe, coffee in hand. She didn't wave, just gave me that watchful look she reserves for the moments when she knows I'm stepping into something irreversible. I tipped 2 fingers off the wheel and eased away. Downtown woke up slow. Broughton Street's shop windows were still half lit, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the corner bakery. The dealership was only 10 minutes off Abercorn, but I took the long route, letting the tires hum against the asphalt, letting the idea of what I was about to do settle in. Dana was already there when I pulled into the lot, a silver suit in the early sun, standing by the glass doors with her tablet tucked under one arm. She glanced at my car with a raised eyebrow but didn't comment. Inside, the showroom gleamed. Light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, bouncing off polished chrome and paint jobs so flawless they looked like poured glass. Kurt Benson emerged from an office near the service bay. He was still built like the linebacker he used to be, hair silver at the edges, but his handshake as solid as I remembered. "Howie Grant," he said, like the name was a winning card. "I heard you might be the one to carry the torch." "Just here to take a look," I said, though my pulse had other ideas. Kurt led us past a row of coupes, their leather interiors stitched so fine they looked like they belonged in a tailor's window. Every few steps, he dropped a number: monthly sales averages, service department margins, lease renewal rates. Dana was silent except for the faint scratch of her stylus across the tablet screen. She logged every word like she was writing the closing argument for a case only she could see. In the back, we stopped by a glass-walled office where two clerks handled stacks of paperwork. Kurt slid a binder across a table in the conference room, thick, heavy, smelling faintly of toner. Lease agreements, financial statements, supplier contracts. My logistics brain kicked in without asking, scanning for bottlenecks, inefficiencies, hidden gems. Halfway through the lease section, my eye caught a familiar street name, a familiar house number. I didn't need to read the tenant's name to know whose signature was on that line. My thumb rested on the page a second longer than it needed to. Dana's eyes flicked to mine, just once, but she didn't ask. We moved to the service bays, the cleanest I'd ever seen. No oil stains, no clutter, just a neat row of lifts and a crew who looked like they'd been trained to greet the president if he walked in for an oil change. Finally, Kurt brought me to the corner office, the one with a view of the lot and the slow-turning test drive loop. The current owner, a compact man in a navy sport coat, rose from behind the desk. His grip was firm, his smile practiced but not insincere. We talked numbers, timelines, the sort of careful dance that keeps everyone in step until the music changes. When we shook hands, there was that small shift in the air, the one you feel when a deal has moved from maybe to likely. By the time I stepped back into the sunlight, the lot shimmered with heat. I could see my sedan parked between two gleaming SUVs, looking like a survivor of another era. I didn't mind. Not today. Dana slid her tablet into her bag. "I'll have the formal offer drafted by tomorrow," she said, voice low. "Once you sign, there's no turning back." "I'm not turning back," I said. Kurt waved from the doorway. "We'll make a great team, Howie." I got into the car, the seat warm from the sun. As I pulled onto Abercorn, a black SUV in the next lane caught my eye. Same make, same model as Victoria's. It accelerated past, windows tinted dark. I followed it with my gaze until it disappeared into traffic. The corner of my mouth lifted. She'd never even noticed the drive that just changed everything. Dana's office was the opposite of the dealership's gleam. No chrome, no showroom gloss. Just oak bookshelves, thick curtains, and a desk that looked like it had been holding up the weight of Savannah's legal secrets for 50 years. She closed the door behind us and set her tablet down. "Let's talk about what ownership really means," she said, sliding a legal pad across the desk toward me. I settled into the leather chair. "I've run companies before, Dana. I get the basics." "You get the basics of logistics," she corrected, uncapping a fountain pen. "Cars are a different animal. You're not just selling, you're leasing. That's a whole separate play." She drew a neat diagram, a box for dealership, arrows leading to customer and lender, little notes about payment schedules. When you own the place, you hold the paper on a lot of those leases, either directly or through the financing arm, which means if payments are late, contracts lapse, or terms are violated. She tapped the paper with the pen. "The car comes back to you. You don't need a judge, you don't need a sheriff, just a truck and a signature." I leaned back. "So repossession is built in." "Exactly. And it's not just for non-payment. Mileage overages, failure to maintain insurance, unauthorized modifications, anything in the agreement gives you leverage." She flipped open a thick folder from the dealership's files, "Which brings me to a certain neighbor of yours." She didn't have to say the name. The top sheet was a lease agreement, the address printed in bold just under the tenant's signature. Renewal date, 6 weeks from now. Payment history, consistently late, though always by just enough to avoid a breach. I let the page rest under my hand. "She's skating the edge." Dana's mouth curved. "Barely. She's skating, period. If you wanted to, you could enforce every letter of this agreement, and when the renewal comes due..." The image came without asking. Victoria's manicured hand signing a new contract, not knowing whose name was on the other side. That night, back at the kitchen table, Linda sat across from me with her mug. Dana's folder lay open between us. I explained the terms, the dates, the clauses. Halfway through, Linda took a sip and promptly choked, coughing coffee into her napkin. "You're telling me," she said once she could breathe again, "that if you own this place, you could, legally, cleanly, take her car? If the terms are breached, yes." She pressed a hand to her forehead, grinning like someone who'd just been handed season tickets to a sport they didn't know they loved, and she'd never see it coming. "That's the point," I said. She laughed again, shaking her head. "You're terrifying when you get quiet about something." I looked down at the renewal date, the neat row of payment entries. "Dana can have the financing paperwork ready by Friday." Linda's eyes softened, but there was steel under it. "Then do it." The next morning, I was back in Dana's office, pen in hand. She walked me through the financing structure, purchase price, down payment, term length. I signed each page deliberately, the way I used to sign shipping contracts for cross-country runs, knowing exactly what freight I was taking on and exactly how I'd deliver it. By the time we reached the last signature line, my name was an anchor at the bottom of a stack thick enough to reshape a neighborhood. Dana slid the papers into a folder, her pen clicking shut with finality. "Once the funds clear, it's yours, all of it, including every lease in that binder." I stood, feeling the strange electric calm that comes when the first move is made, and there's no taking it back. Out on the sidewalk, the sun was bright enough to make me squint. Across the street, a woman in a pearl-colored SUV eased out of a parking space, the same model as Victoria's. I watched it glide into traffic, the engine smooth and silent. In 6 weeks, I thought, one phone call could make an engine just like that go silent for good. The purchase contract lay open across Dana's desk, its heavy cream pages spread like the chapters of a book whose ending I already knew. It was thick enough to warrant its own briefcase, the sort of document you didn't just sign, you committed to it, the way you might commit to a journey with no return ticket. The dealership's embossed logo shone faintly at the top of each sheet, and my name waited patiently in the blank spaces, ready to become part of its history. Dana adjusted her glasses and nudged the final page toward me, the gold clip of her pen catching the morning light. "This is it," she said in that precise, unhurried voice of hers. "Once you sign, you take everything, assets, inventory, and every obligation that comes with them, including the leases." Her eyes held mine for a beat, as if making sure I understood the weight of those last 2 words. I understood perfectly. The pen felt solid in my hand, not unlike the Mont Blanc I'd used decades ago to sign my very first freight contract. Back then, my hand had trembled slightly from a mix of excitement and fear. Today it was steady, my grip anchored by something colder, more deliberate. I let the tip hover over the line for a moment before pressing it down and moving with a slow, deliberate stroke, each loop of my signature etching a new reality into place. When I set the pen aside, Dana lifted the contract and tapped the corner against the desk, aligning it with neat precision. "Congratulations, Mr. Grant," she said. "You now own a dealership." The words didn't sound as strange as I'd expected. Kurt Benson was waiting just outside her office, leaning against the glass wall like a man ready to step into a new chapter of his own. His smile was easy, but there was an undercurrent of calculation in the way he studied me. "Welcome aboard, boss," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, professional, an acknowledgement between 2 men who understood that titles were just the start of what really mattered. He took me on a slow walk through the building, this time not as a potential buyer, but as the man in charge. The showroom gleamed brighter than I remembered from my first visit, its floor polished to a mirrored sheen that reflected the sweep of the cars lined up in flawless rows. Each vehicle sat under its own halo of light, leather interiors pristine, paint jobs so smooth they looked like liquid poured over steel. We stopped to greet the sales team, sharp suits, polished shoes, smiles that didn't falter even under new ownership. A young woman at the reception desk offered a warm, "Congratulations, Mr. Grant," without missing a beat as she juggled 2 incoming calls. The service department was next, spotless bays, tools arranged with the kind of precision that spoke of pride, not just habit. Every tech we passed paused to shake my hand or nod respectfully, though I could feel the subtle appraisal in their eyes. Finally, Kurt led me into his office. A single binder waited on his desk, its black leather cover unmarked except for a discreet dealership crest embossed in the corner. "This," he said, flipping it open, "is the current roster of active leases. I like new owners to know exactly what they're working with. I eased into the chair opposite him and began turning the pages. Each sheet was a tidy ledger of details: names, addresses, vehicle identification numbers, terms, and payment histories. I moved at an unhurried pace until one entry stopped me cold. The address was familiar before I even processed the name. The neat print spelled it out clearly: Victoria Hale. I took in the numbers without letting my expression change. The payment history column told its own story: always late, but only by a few days, the kind of habitual delay that kept her just inside the fence of compliance. Kurt watched me with a careful neutrality. "She's consistent," he said finally. "Not enough to violate the lease outright, but enough to keep our accounting folks sighing every month. Some people just like to play that edge." I closed the binder slowly, letting my fingertips rest on the cover. "I see," was all I said. Kurt tucked the binder back into his desk drawer, pivoting to a discussion about sales projections and service capacity. I nodded at the right points, my mind already holding the shape of a plan. That evening, back in our kitchen, Linda poured 2 glasses from the bottle of small batch bourbon we'd been saving. She slid one toward me and lifted hers in a silent toast. I matched her gesture. "To what exactly?" she asked, her eyes glinting over the rim of the glass. I let a faint smile curve my mouth. "To ownership," I said, pausing just long enough before adding, "and to timely consequences." She laughed, the sound rich and unguarded, then took a slow sip. "I'll drink to that." The bourbon burned pleasantly on its way down, the kind of heat that lingers and deepens, like the quiet satisfaction of knowing the keys to every car on that lot, including one parked across the street, were now, quite literally, in my hands. The letter was printed on heavy dealership stationery, the kind that felt official before you even read the first line. The logo sat in the top corner, crisp and understated, the typeface modern enough to feel polished but still conservative enough to command respect. It was standard language. Kurt assured me of that. No threats, no accusations, just a polite but firm reminder that the most recent payment had not been received by the due date. It explained the grace period, the amount owed, the payment methods available, and the contact number for questions. I read it once for content, then again for tone. I wasn't looking to add venom. It wasn't time for that yet. But I wanted to be certain every word carried the weight of policy, not personal spite. Dana had said once that in matters like these, the strength of your position came from the cold neutrality of the paper, not the heat of your temper. At the bottom was the signature line for the general manager. I'd asked Kurt to leave it blank. I signed my own name instead, careful, deliberate, the ink drying dark against the cream stock. "Should I have it mailed from here or the main post office?" Kurt asked. "Main," I said. "It's good practice for official notices." I folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and pressed the flap closed. The adhesive tasted faintly of chemicals and satisfaction. 2 days later, the HOA grapevine lit up. I didn't need to be at the community mailbox to hear it. Linda carried the news in from her afternoon walk like she was bringing in fresh bread. "She's telling anyone who will listen," she said, setting her sunglasses on the counter. "Claims she got some sort of clerical error letter from the dealership. Says they're accusing her of not paying and she's threatening to call corporate." I took a slow sip of coffee. "We are corporate." Linda's smile tilted just enough to show she was enjoying herself. "She doesn't know that. Yet." From the living room window, I could see a small knot of neighbors gathered under the shade of the magnolia at the end of the street. Victoria stood in the middle, her white sundress bright against the green, sunglasses pushed high on her head. Her hands moved as she spoke, the paper in one fluttering like a captured bird. The men nodded politely, the women's expressions hovered between sympathy and restrained amusement. Savannah courtesies ran deep, but the undercurrent of gossip was always there, humming like an electric wire under wet grass. She broke away from the group a few minutes later, striding toward her driveway. Even from here I could read irritation in the stiff set of her shoulders. She yanked open the driver's door of her SUV, tossed the envelope into the passenger seat, and slid behind the wheel. The engine came to life with a smooth purr, but the way she reversed, sharp, fast, betrayed the fact that she wasn't driving away from the problem so much as from the audience. I watched her tail lights disappear down the curve of the cul-de-sac before turning back to Linda. She was leaning against the counter, arms folded, one eyebrow arched. "You're enjoying this more than you thought you would," she said. I didn't deny it. That evening, Ed dropped by, as he often did when the day was still too light for television but too late for fishing. He took his usual chair at the kitchen table, propped an elbow on the back, and gave me a long, assessing look. "So," he said, "has the entertainment value kicked in yet?" I set down my glass and allowed myself a slow grin. "Let's just say the previews are promising." Ed chuckled, the sound low and approving. "You haven't even gotten to the good part." "What's the good part?" I asked, though I already suspected I knew. "The part where she figures out the paper trail leads right back to you." I thought about the envelope on her passenger seat, the one she'd waved like a prop in her sidewalk monologue. She hadn't opened it in front of anyone. Maybe she'd read it later, maybe not. Either way, the clock had started ticking the moment she broke the seal. And I was in no rush to stop it. Kurt called her from his office late on a Thursday afternoon. I was standing by the window, looking out over the lot, pretending to check the weather while really just wanting to hear her voice through the speaker. He had his headset on, one elbow resting on the arm of his chair. "Mrs. Hale, this is Kurt Benson, general manager at—" He paused, listening, and I could see the faint tightening around his eyes. "Yes, ma'am, I understand, but according to our records, your payment is past due. I wanted to—" Another pause, this one longer, followed by the smallest shake of his head. I could hear the faint buzz of her voice spilling from his earpiece, sharp, rapid, dismissive. She wasn't raising her voice, but every syllable carried that brittle, almost bored condescension I'd heard in person more times than I cared to count. Kurt sat back. "I see. Well, ma'am, we do have a grace period, but we'll need to receive the payment before—" He stopped again, lips pressing into a thin line. His gaze flicked to me, then away. "Of course. When you get around to it. I'll make a note." He clicked off the call and set the headset down carefully, like he didn't want to snap it in two. "She says she'll pay when she gets around to it." I let that hang in the air for a moment, just long enough for the words to lose any pretense of civility and settle into what they really were, a dare. "Draw up the order," I said. Kurt didn't ask which order. He reached into the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a crisp, single-page form. It was spare and unsentimental. Vehicle description, VIN number, license plate, current location, reason for repossession. There was a line for authorized by at the bottom, waiting for my name. When I got home that evening, Linda was in the kitchen, rinsing lettuce for dinner. I set the folded form on the counter beside her cutting board. Water beaded and rolled across the plastic cover. She glanced at it, then at me. "That what I think it is?" "It is." Her hands stilled in the colander. A slow smile worked its way across her face, the kind she didn't have to force. "You're actually going to do it." I opened the cover, took the pen she kept by the phone, and signed my name in a firm, unbroken line. She watched the whole thing, chin propped in one hand. "You should frame that," she said. I slid the form back into my jacket pocket. "I plan on keeping the memory instead." Just then, a knock rattled the screen door. Ed stepped in without waiting, as usual, holding 2 bottles of beer like he was delivering mail. He handed one to me, the other to Linda, then leaned against the counter. His eyes landed on the edge of the form poking out of my pocket. "Tell me that's what I think it is," he said. Linda answered for me. "He's pulling the trigger." Ed's grin was boyish and shameless. "You want company when it happens?" "Not necessary," I said, though the truth was I could already picture him in the passenger seat of the tow truck, leaning halfway out the window for a better look. Kurt texted me just after 8 that night. "Scheduled for tomorrow morning, 5:30 a.m. crew, quiet pull." I set the phone down beside my glass. Outside, the street lamps cast their cones of yellow light across the cul-de-sac, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the faint hum of Victoria's SUV returning home. She wouldn't see them coming, and she'd remember the morning for a very, very long time. The first sound I heard was not the truck. It was Linda, padding into the kitchen barefoot, the soft shuffle of her robe against the tile. The clock on the stove read 5:27 a.m., and the sky beyond the window was the pale, uncertain gray that comes right before dawn decides what kind of day it's going to be. The tow truck rolled into the cul-de-sac with the kind of quiet you don't expect from a machine that size. No rattling chains, no backup alarm, just the low hum of a well-maintained diesel easing to the curb in front of Victoria's driveway. The driver, a wiry man in a dark cap, stepped down and crossed to her SUV, moving with a deliberate, practiced efficiency. From our kitchen window, the scene looked almost surgical. He worked the rig into place, threading the wheel lift under the rear tires like a hand slipping into a glove. The hydraulics whispered, lifting the back end just enough to make the SUV tilt imperceptibly toward the truck. He secured the straps in 3 quick motions, checked them once, and reached for the safety chains. Linda had her phone out, holding it low at first, then angling it to capture the whole operation. Her reflection in the glass showed the faintest smile. "I'm just making sure we have a record," she murmured, not taking her eyes off the view. The truck's engine stayed idling, steady and quiet. Across the street, Victoria's house still looked asleep. Blinds drawn, no porch light. The driver was already sliding the control arm back into place when I saw movement inside. Her front door swung open so fast it banged against the siding. She came out in a silk robe, hair twisted into a loose knot, the letter from the dealership crumpled in one hand. She took 2 steps before she realized what was happening. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Her voice cut through the stillness like glass snapping underfoot. The driver didn't flinch. He kept working, adjusting the tow lift until it locked with a metallic click. "That's my car," she shouted, bare feet slapping the driveway. "You can't just—" "You'll need to talk to your dealership," the driver said, his tone flat, almost bored. It was clear this wasn't his first morning confrontation. Linda caught that part on video, her camera steady, framing both of them in the early light. Victoria's voice jumped an octave as she tried a different tactic, demanding to see paperwork, threatening to call the police, insisting there had been a mistake. The driver didn't stop, didn't argue. He simply climbed back into the truck, checked his mirrors, and tapped the brakes just enough to test the connection. The SUV's alarm blared once, then died as quickly as it had started, overridden by the tow system's wiring. The silence that followed was louder than the alarm itself. I stayed back from the window, letting Linda have the vantage point. The truck eased forward, pulling the SUV onto the street in a slow, controlled arc. Victoria followed a few steps, then stopped, arms rigid at her sides, watching her status symbol disappear around the bend. The driver never looked back. Linda lowered her phone and turned to me, her expression a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. "You realize she's going to figure it out now." I reached for the coffee pot, filling my mug to the brim. "That's the point," I said. Outside, the cul-de-sac was returning to its usual morning stillness, but the day had already changed. For her, it was the morning her car vanished. For me, it was the morning the real game began. The dealership's glass doors banged open hard enough to rattle the frames, and every head in the showroom turned toward the sound. Victoria Hale strode inside as if the concrete sidewalk had been a runway, and she'd just made her entrance. Her heels clacked sharp against the polished tile, expensive shoes, fast steps, and a robe replaced by a fitted navy dress that looked chosen for the purpose of confrontation. In her hand was a leather tote, heavy enough to be carrying every scrap of indignation she'd collected since sunrise. "I want the owner," she snapped to the first person in her path, a young salesman who had been in the middle of offering coffee to a couple looking at a coupe. Her tone made him forget the cups entirely. Kurt appeared from his office before the kid could stammer out a reply. "Morning, Mrs. Hale." His voice was polite, but his eyes held the wary calm of someone who's been through more than one public storm. "Don't morning me, Benson," she shot back. "I want to see whoever's in charge right now. Your driver stole my vehicle, and unless you'd like the police involved—" Kurt gestured toward the far end of the showroom, where my office door was propped open. "That would be Mr. Grant." She turned to follow his hand, and for the first time in her morning, Victoria stopped moving. I was sitting at my desk with a stack of contracts, pen in hand, the sunlight falling in long slats across the wood. I looked up and let a small, deliberate pause fill the space between recognition and greeting. "Victoria," I said evenly. "Come in." Her jaw worked once like she was trying to choose between surprise and outrage and found herself unable to settle on either. She stepped inside without closing the door behind her. "What the hell is this?" She swept her hand toward the lot outside, where the empty space in her driveway might as well have been parked in neon on her forehead. "You had my car towed? Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" I set the pen down carefully, aligning it parallel to the edge of the blotter. "I have an idea, yes." "This isn't funny, Howie," she said, using my first name like a weapon. "You can't. This is personal." I leaned back slightly, letting the chair creak just enough to remind her the room was quiet, that every word she spoke was landing in that quiet. "Personal would be showing up at 5:30 in the morning myself," I said. "This was business." Her eyes flashed, but I could see the faint edge of calculation behind them, the quick mental tallying of what she thought she knew, what she didn't, and how to frame her outrage to her advantage. I opened the center drawer of my desk and withdrew a folder. Inside was a copy of her lease agreement, printed in the same dealership letterhead she'd waved around the cul-de-sac days earlier. I slid it across the desk, rotating it so the signature faced her. "Your contract," I said simply. She didn't touch it, just looked down at the familiar lines, the neat block of payment history, the clause numbers she had likely skimmed over the day she signed. "You really think you can hide behind paperwork?" she asked, her voice low now, almost cold. "I don't have to hide," I said. "It's all right there. Every date, every clause, every late payment. And now, every next step." Her gaze flicked from the paper to me and back again. The set of her shoulders shifted. Not surrender, but the realization that she'd just walked into an arena where the rules were already written, and not by her. She pushed the folder back an inch, not enough to send it away, just enough to put space between her hand and her own signature. "You think this ends here?" I folded my hands on the desk, leaning forward just slightly. "I'm counting on it not ending here." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Out in the showroom, a phone rang twice before someone picked up. The hum of the air conditioning filled the rest of the silence. And then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out. I let her go because she wasn't leaving empty-handed. She was taking the contract with her, in her mind if not in her tote, and that was worth more than the SUV. The real question now wasn't whether she'd fight back. It was how. She was back the next morning, but the storm had shifted. Gone was the navy dress and sharp-heeled certainty of yesterday. This time Victoria wore pale slacks, a cream blouse, and sunglasses she didn't take off when she stepped into my office. The tote was gone too, replaced by a slim folder she held with both hands, like it might get her SUV returned if she kept it close enough. "I think we can work something out," she began, her voice low and controlled, as if the air between us needed careful handling. I leaned back in my chair, watching the way she smoothed the front of her blouse before sitting. "By all means." She laid out her points, how she'd been a loyal customer, how her payments had always been made, eventually, how the late notices were technicalities, not failures. Each sentence was carefully chosen, polished to sound reasonable, almost wounded. When she finished, I nodded slowly. "All right, I can put you in a car today." Relief flickered across her face, quick as a match strike. I reached into the file drawer, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the desk. "Standard lease, basic model, no upgrades, no modifications, standard rates, standard terms." Her fingers hovered over the paper, then withdrew. "Basic," she repeated, the word tasting wrong in her mouth. "It's dependable," I said. "Clean lines, good mileage, and it'll be in your driveway this afternoon." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think I'm going to be seen in that?" I shrugged. "You wanted a car. I'm offering you one, at terms that meet policy." Her chin lifted. "I'll find something else." "That's your choice." She pushed her chair back, stood, and smoothed her blouse again. "You know this is petty." I met her gaze evenly. "I know it's business." The sunglasses stayed on as she left, but through the glass wall of my office, I watched her step out into the heat and pull out her phone. A few minutes later, a black rideshare sedan slid into the lot. She got in without looking back. By Thursday night, the HOA meeting was standing room only in the clubhouse. Folding chairs scraped the tile, the smell of coffee mingled with the faint tang of copier toner. The agenda on the whiteboard listed parking violations, landscaping, and upcoming block party, but the real draw was already buzzing in the air: Victoria's missing SUV. She sat 2 rows from the front, hands clasped in her lap, posture immaculate. People stole glances at her but spoke in low voices, the kind that carry just far enough to be heard by everyone they're not meant for. Linda and I took seats in the back. She was wearing her crimson blouse, the one she saves for events where she wants to be noticed without having to say much. As the meeting droned on about mulch deliveries and pet leash reminders, I caught the faintest smile tugging at her mouth. When the floor opened for questions, a man from 3 streets over asked whether there was a policy about vehicles being removed from the neighborhood. His tone was mild, but his eyes flicked toward Victoria. The room went still for a beat too long. Then the HOA president, trying and failing to hide a smirk, said, "Not our jurisdiction." A few chuckles broke the surface. Victoria didn't move, didn't speak. Linda crossed one leg over the other, her heel tapping once against the tile. Her smile widened just enough for me to see it from the corner of my eye. By the time we walked out into the humid night, the air was thick with the faint electric crackle of gossip taking root. And I had the sense that for Victoria, the loss of the SUV might not be the worst part. It was losing the audience she thought she owned. The invoice sat on my desk like it knew it wasn't going to be paid. Kurt had already given her the courtesy period, calls placed, emails sent, a polite reminder letter. Nothing. Not even a token payment to stall the clock. She was playing the same game she'd always played, only now the rules had changed, and the scoreboard was mine to keep. I opened my laptop, scanned the PDF one last time, and forwarded it to the dealership's collections agency. The subject line was simple: pursue in full. It was the kind of email you send in less than 5 seconds, but the act carried the same quiet finality as turning a deadbolt. 2 afternoons later, Linda caught sight of her before I did. I was in the garage, sorting through a box of old tools I didn't need but couldn't throw away, when Linda's voice came from the kitchen window. "She's got the letter." By the time I stepped out to the porch, Victoria was at the curb in front of her house, holding a white envelope with the bold black lettering that only ever meant money was owed. She was in full voice, projecting to the 2 women from the next cul-de-sac over. "They're saying I owe this much for a car they stole," she announced, holding the paper up like proof in a trial. "This is harassment. I've already called my lawyer." The women nodded in that tight-lipped way people do when they want to be supportive, but don't want to be subpoenaed later. From where I stood, I could see Mark on the porch behind her, half hidden in the shadow of the doorframe. He was leaning against the siding, arms folded, gaze fixed on the azalea bush like it had the answers to a very difficult question. He didn't say a word. Victoria noticed him watching and snapped, "Are you just going to stand there?" Mark's shoulders lifted in a shrug that looked like it had taken years to perfect, half apology, half avoidance. He disappeared inside a moment later. The neighborhood took the story and ran with it. By the next morning, Mrs. Keller told Linda, under the guise of borrowing sugar, that she'd heard Victoria's bill was in the thousands. At the mailbox, a man I only vaguely recognized asked if it was true that the dealership had gone nuclear over a late payment. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I just smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't answer anything but keeps the questions coming. Linda seemed to enjoy this part more than I did. She had a way of moving through the cul-de-sac like she wasn't listening, while every word found its way back to her. By the time dinner rolled around, she had a running tally of who was siding with whom, who was staying neutral, and who was keeping quiet to avoid being dragged in. That Friday we baked. Well, Linda baked. I just stayed close enough to taste test and keep the coffee pot full. She had 2 trays of oatmeal chocolate chip cookies cooling on the counter when she pulled out a Tupperware container and started filling it. "For Ed," she said, snapping the lid into place. We walked the short path to his house as the sun was sliding down toward the trees, the air warm and soft in that way Savannah manages in late spring. Ed opened the door before we knocked, as if he'd been expecting us. "Smells like a bribe," he said, grinning as Linda handed him the container. "It's gratitude," she corrected, "for keeping certain secrets exactly where they belong." Ed looked past us, toward the curve of the street where Victoria's driveway sat empty. "She's making friends this week," he said dryly. Linda laughed, the sound light but edged. "She's making something," she said. "Not sure you'd call them friends." Ed's gaze shifted to me, one eyebrow raised. "What's next?" I didn't answer right away, because I already knew. And the knowing was its own kind of pleasure. By the end of the first full month under my ownership, the numbers told the story better than I could have. Kurt came into my office one Friday afternoon carrying the sales report like it was a good bottle of wine. "Up 12% over last month," he said, setting the pages down. "Service departments booked 2 weeks out. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I had a pretty good idea what it was. We'd stripped out the gimmicks. No more bait and switch ads, no hidden fees tucked into paperwork. Instead, we made sure every customer walked into a handshake, a straight answer, and a cup of decent coffee. Kurt joked that we were the only dealership in Savannah where people stayed after signing just to talk. I told him that was the point. We also rolled out a simple rule. If a car went in for service, the customer got a text when it was ready, along with a photo of the completed work order. No waiting around for a call that might or might not come. The techs liked it, the customers loved it, and Kurt admitted it cut down on the grumbling that used to wear everyone thin. Ed started hanging around more than usual, leaning on the showroom counter like he'd been born there. At first, he was just dropping by on his way to or from the marina, but before long he was fielding questions from walk-ins, charming them into test drives and telling them exactly which trim package they needed without overselling. One afternoon, Kurt caught me watching Ed chat up a retired couple looking at a crossover. "You realize he's doing half my job for free?" Kurt said. "Then we should probably start paying him," I replied. 2 days later, Ed had a part-time consultant badge clipped to his belt and the freedom to wander between the lot and the marina as he pleased. The real moment came when Linda decided it was time to retire her sedan. She'd been circling the idea for weeks, dropping it into conversation the way a cat bats at a toy, casually, but with intent. One Saturday, she walked into the dealership, straight to the candy apple red SUV parked under the front windows. "That one," she said. It was the top-of-the-line model, every safety feature, every comfort add-on, panoramic roof, leather seats that adjusted 14 different ways. She didn't even ask the price. I didn't have to run the numbers. I just had Kurt start the paperwork and told him it would be paid in full. Cash. Linda's smile when she slid behind the wheel was worth more than the car. She took the long way home, making sure the route looped past the busiest part of the neighborhood. The sun caught the paint just right, turning it into a moving flame as she eased it down our street. Victoria was in her yard, pruning roses. She looked up, she looked at the car, and for a split second, she forgot to keep her expression neutral. The glare that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Linda pulled into our driveway without so much as a glance in her direction, humming as she shut the engine off. Inside, she tossed me the keys. "Your turn to take it for a spin," she said, though she knew I wasn't the one who needed to enjoy that moment. From the front window, I could see Victoria still standing by her roses, clippers frozen mid-air. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. She might have lost the SUV, but this felt like the part that would stick. And the best part? We weren't done yet. The HOA picnic was held in the park at the far end of the neighborhood under a canopy of live oaks draped in Spanish moss. By mid-afternoon, the air was heavy with the smell of barbecue smoke and sweet tea, the sound of kids shrieking around the bounce house, and the low thrum of a country playlist coming from rented speakers. The long tables were covered in gingham cloths, already sagging under the weight of crockpots and casserole dishes. But it wasn't the food that caught my attention when Linda and I arrived. It was the banner. Stretched across the front of the serving area in clean block lettering was Grant Motors, proud sponsor of the 14th annual HOA picnic. Beneath it, the dealership's logo gleamed, sharp and unmistakable. It had been Kurt's idea to sponsor the event. "Community goodwill," he'd called it. I'd signed the check without hesitation, knowing full well it was more than goodwill. It was branding in the most strategic square mile possible. We hadn't even made it to the drink station before the first neighbor stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Howie, this place of yours. People are talking. My cousin bought a truck last week, says it was the best buying experience he's ever had." I thanked him, shook more hands, nodded to stories about cars purchased, services rendered, deals made without haggling. Every few minutes, someone else drifted over, offering praise with the kind of warmth that made me wonder if they'd been waiting for the right moment to say it. From the corner of my eye, I saw her. Victoria stood near the dessert table, posture perfect, holding a paper plate with a slice of pie she wasn't eating. She was dressed for photographs, a fitted green sundress, hair smooth and glossy, but her eyes slid right past mine every time I looked in her direction. Linda noticed too. She touched my arm lightly. "Play nice," she murmured, though her tone said she wouldn't mind if I didn't. We worked our way toward the tables. Halfway there, Mark detached himself from a group of men discussing lawn fertilizer. He gave me a small, careful nod before turning to Linda. "Linda," he said warmly, "good to see you." "You too, Mark." Her voice was even, her smile polite but genuine enough to pass any test. They exchanged a few lines about the weather, the food, the turnout. It was surface level, but I could feel the undercurrent, a quiet acknowledgement that he was in a position that didn't require defending, but certainly didn't invite deeper conversation. When we moved on, Linda's hand brushed mine. "He's a man trying to stay out of crossfire," she said softly. Ed found us near the grill. His plate was already piled high, and from the satisfied look on his face, I suspected it wasn't his first trip through the line. "They've got brisket, pulled pork, ribs. Why choose?" he said, taking another bite before I could answer. "If this is what sponsorship gets you, I say we sign you up for every event on the calendar." Over the next hour, we circled the picnic, speaking to nearly everyone. I answered questions about the dealership's new models, gave out a few business cards, and watched as the banner caught people's eyes again and again. It wasn't just an ad, it was a statement. The business was here, thriving, and mine. Victoria kept to the far side of the tables, her smile reserved for those who approached her. Once, our gazes met across the space between us. Just once. And in that moment, I saw the calculation in her expression, the realization that whatever grip she'd once had on the neighborhood's attention was loosening. The sun was dipping lower when the HOA president tapped the microphone and thanked the sponsors. My name was mentioned, and a small round of applause followed. Linda squeezed my hand. Ed raised his soda in a mock toast. I looked toward Victoria, but she was already walking away, her plate empty, her back straight. The banner swayed gently in the breeze above the tables, and I knew she'd seen it. Knew she'd remember it. And I had an idea for something even bigger. The idea had started as a half-formed thought on the walk home from the picnic, something about doing more than just selling cars, about putting my name in a place where it would last longer than a banner over folding tables. By the following Monday, it had a name: the Grant Motors Scholarship for Automotive Trades. One award each year to a local student headed into a certified mechanic program or dealership management track. Tuition help, tool stipends, and a guaranteed summer internship at the dealership. Kurt was all for it. Good PR, solid community investment, and, as he put it, a pipeline of talent that's not afraid to get their hands dirty. Linda just smiled when she heard the idea, the same way she had when I signed the purchase contract, like she knew I was playing a longer game than I let on. The press release went out midweek. By Friday, the Savannah Chronicle had run a short feature with a photo of me in the service bay, shaking hands with one of our senior techs. The headline read, "Local Dealership Drives Future of Skilled Trades." It wasn't front-page news, but it was the kind of piece people clipped and stuck on community bulletin boards. Victoria's name, of course, never appeared. I doubted she read past the headline, if she read it at all, but her silence was almost as satisfying as a complaint. The award ceremony was set for a Thursday evening in the high school auditorium. Linda and I arrived early, greeted by the smell of polished wood and the faint echo of band practice in the distance. A modest stage had been dressed with a podium, a banner bearing the scholarship name, and a single table with a thick envelope and a ceremonial check propped against it. Ed was already there, camera slung around his neck, fiddling with the settings. "Gonna make this look good for the newsletter," he said, clicking off a test shot of the banner. "Better smile when you get up there. I don't want to have to fix you in Photoshop." Parents, students, and a few school board members trickled in, filling the first rows with the soft rustle of programs and the low murmur of conversation. When the principal stepped to the microphone, her voice carried that practiced balance of pride and ceremony. She spoke about the importance of skilled trades, about how not every young person fits neatly into the college track, and how the scholarship represented opportunity, stability, and respect for work that kept the world moving. I knew some of those lines had come from Kurt's draft press release, but hearing them here, in this space, gave them more weight. When my name was called, I walked to the podium and kept my remarks brief. 2 minutes, maybe 3. I talked about my own early days turning a wrench in a hot warehouse, about the satisfaction of fixing something that stayed fixed, and about the dealership's commitment to giving local talent a path forward. Then came the moment. The first recipient was a wiry kid named Daniel Reyes, quiet, with dark hair that kept falling into his eyes. He'd been accepted to an automotive technology program 2 towns over and had been working part-time at a tire shop to help cover expenses. When I handed him the envelope, his grip was strong and his voice carried farther than I expected. "Thank you, Mr. Grant. This makes the difference. I'll make it count." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was genuine, warm, filling the room in a way you could feel in your chest. I caught Linda's expression in the front row. Pride, but also something sharper, a recognition of exactly what this meant in the larger picture. Ed caught the handshake, the envelope, the smile, all of it through his lens. I had no doubt it would be the lead photo in the next dealership newsletter. After the ceremony, as people gathered in small clusters, I noticed Victoria's absence. It wasn't her crowd, and maybe that was the point. She wouldn't be in the photos, wouldn't be in the story that would circulate through the neighborhood, the paper, and the dealership's mailing list. The spotlight had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. As we left, Daniel's mother stopped us at the door, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You didn't just help him," she said quietly. "You reminded him that people believe in him." I nodded because there wasn't much else to say. Back in the car, Linda glanced over at me. "You know," she said, "the part she really won't like is that you didn't do this to spite her. You did it for someone else entirely." I smiled at that, but between us, I knew better. Because legacies aren't just about who you lift up, they're also about who gets left standing on the sidelines, watching. We left before sunrise, the new SUV's headlights cutting a clean path through the soft blue-gray of early morning. Linda was in the passenger seat, bare feet tucked under her, coffee steaming in the travel mug she'd insisted on bringing. The road was open, and the low hum of the engine felt steady, confident, like it knew it belonged here. The Georgia coast has a way of unfolding slowly, the marshlands stretching out in flat, shimmering greens, dotted with egrets standing motionless in the tide pools. I kept the speed just under the limit, not out of caution, but to make the drive last longer. Linda had the panoramic roof cracked open, letting in the salt air and the faint cry of gulls drifting in from somewhere ahead. We stopped in Darien, a sleepy fishing town that smelled like brine and diesel, the docks stacked with crab traps. The restaurant was nothing more than a weathered building on stilts, but the fried shrimp came piled high on paper-lined baskets, and the iced tea was poured into mason jars cold enough to bead instantly in the humid air. Linda grinned at me over a forkful of hush puppies. "You realize this is the first trip we've taken in years without an agenda?" "That's the point," I said. She leaned back, letting the sun catch her hair, and started talking about places she wanted to go next. A fall trip through the Blue Ridge to see the leaves change, maybe New Orleans in spring. For the food and the music, she said, as though those 2 things could sum up an entire city. I didn't promise anything, but I didn't say no either. After lunch, we cruised south along Highway 17, where the live oaks grew close enough overhead to lace the sky with their branches. The SUV handled every curve like it was made for this road. Quiet power, smooth downshifts, just enough response when I eased my foot down to pass a slow-moving pickup. Linda had the seat reclined, her eyes half closed. "This was a good idea," she murmured. "I have a few of those now and then," I said. She laughed softly, the kind of sound that slips into the air and lingers. By the time we reached the stretch of coastline near St. Simon's, the sun was tilting low enough to turn the water gold. We pulled off at a public pier, walking out past the fishermen with their coolers and tackle boxes. Pelicans skimmed the surface, diving hard when they spotted a flash of silver beneath the waves. Linda leaned against the railing, looking out at the horizon. "Feels like we finally got out from under something," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away because I knew she wasn't talking about work or the dealership. She meant the weight of it all. The years of putting up with little slights, the petty power plays, the constant hum of someone else's ego taking up too much space in the neighborhood. I thought about the banner at the HOA picnic, the scholarship check in Daniel's hands, the empty spot in Victoria's driveway, about every quiet choice that had stacked, one on top of the other, until the view looked like this, wide open, sunlit, ours. When we got back in the SUV, I took the long way home, tracing the coast road until the sky deepened from gold to rose, then into that brief, impossible purple that comes before night settles in. The headlights swept over the asphalt, the engine steady beneath us, the cabin holding the warmth of the day. Linda rested her hand on mine where it sat on the console, a small, wordless acknowledgement of the road we'd taken, not just today, but all of it. And as the last sliver of sun slipped into the water behind us, I knew exactly what I'd tell her if she asked me how it felt. Some engines purr, others roar, mine hums with payback.